I never believed in mysticism until space spoke to me personally. That night, I was on the night shift at the Kepler-9 observatory, drinking synth coffee and trying not to fall asleep to the hum of the servers. Everything was as usual: endless data packets, boring pulsar signals, rare satellite noise, until, at 0347 UTC, the system flagged an anomaly. I didn't realize what was happening at first. Numbers started running across the screen as if someone was typing from inside it. At first I thought it was a glitch, then a virus, or maybe one of the techs was playing with the neural net again. But the longer I watched, the clearer it became. This wasn't a mistake. It was a language, too structured to be random noise, and too alien to be ours. I froze. Then, for some reason, the air grew cold, even though the dome's temperature remained stable. At that moment, I didn't yet know that I was the first human to hear the call of those who would later be known as the Keepers. When the military arrived in the morning, I still couldn't take my eyes off the screen. The code repeated cyclically, like breathing. I tried to decode it, but every attempt crashed the system. They said the data had to be transferred to the central agency. I didn't argue, but secretly kept a copy for myself. Something about that signal struck the mind directly, like a forgotten memory resurfacing. That night, I heard it in my dreams, not as sound, but as a rhythm inside my head. Faint at first, then persistent, like a heartbeat. I woke up drenched in cold sweat and realized I could reproduce part of the sequence from memory, even though I didn't understand a single symbol. People often say the mind seeks meaning, but that night, it felt like my mind was trying to remember something it had once created. Within a day, the entire scientific sector of Earth knew about the signal. It had been received at the Mexican observatory, the lunar base Argos, and even the orbital ring. Everything matched. 3 different stations, 3 different observation angles, one source. The coordinates pointed to empty space beyond Neptune's orbit, in a region where there should have been nothing but ice and darkness. That's when the circus began. Scientists argued, politicians demanded reports, generals built theories about hostile activity. Some in the media said it was a new AI virus, others claimed it was a message from the gods. I just stayed silent. Because when you listen to something for too long, you start to understand its rhythm not with your mind, but with your skin. I tried to explain that the signal wasn't just code, it was alive. Its structure changed every time we interfered. We sent impulse responses, and it reacted. It wasn't communication in the usual sense, more like an exchange of presences. At some point, the signal seemed to pause and started repeating our own reply, like an echo, but distorted, as if something was trying to match our tone. That's when I realized we weren't the ones listening. We were being listened to. And that's when the real fear began. Not because we didn't know who it was, but because they seemed to understand us too well. 3 days passed. The agency decided to declassify only part of the information to avoid panic. The rest went into sealed archives, but leaks were already spreading online. Fragments of data, audio files, even speculation that the signal contained instructions for creating some kind of awakening matrix. I laughed when I first read that, but the laughter didn't last. Every time I opened the file with the original recording, something changed, as if the document had a life of its own. Sometimes letters flashed for a split second, forming shapes like faces. Sometimes the sound turned into a whisper. Then I would shut everything down, drink myself numb, and swear I'd never touch that madness again. But by morning, I was back at the monitor. On the 6th day, the signal vanished. It just stopped, as if someone had turned it off. We waited for another pulse, checked the antennas, rebooted the systems. Nothing. But the silence was even worse. People in the lab started acting strangely. Some had nightmares, others complained of headaches. One technician said he saw the stars moving at night. I didn't think much of it until I noticed that the constellation Lyra had slightly shifted, not in the sky, but in my head, as if someone was recalibrating perception itself. That's when, For the first time, I became afraid not of the signal, but of myself. Then came the order. Everyone who had direct contact with the original data was moved into quarantine. They kept us locked up, ran tests on our psyche, blood, neural patterns. I tried to explain that it wasn't a virus, not radiation. It was something else, as if the signal had activated a dormant part of me. But the more I spoke, the more they looked at me like I was insane. The last thing I remember from that time was the lights in the isolation ward flickering in sync with my heartbeat. And in that instant, I knew they were still here. They never left. They were just waiting for us to look up at the sky again. 23 days after the signal vanished, the sky above Earth was no longer ours. It began quietly, so quietly that if someone later asked when exactly it happened, no one could name the moment. We just started noticing shadows in orbit. They didn't move, didn't emit radio noise, didn't respond to any signals. Satellites transmitted strange reflections, as if someone had covered the planet with a transparent dome, with air vibrating inside it. Governments insisted it was a sensor glitch, solar activity, gravitational waves, anything but the obvious. But when the first descent capsule appeared over the Pacific Ocean, there was no more doubt. I was standing on the roof of the Institute, watching something massive, shimmering with metallic light, slowly sink into the clouds. It didn't fall. It submerged, like into water. Then, it was gone. In that moment, I understood. The signal wasn't an invitation. It was a return address. The first message from them didn't come through radio or the network or any spoken language. It came into our minds. Not to everyone, only to those who had once interacted with the original signal. I was among them. The voice was emotionless, steady, like a pre-recorded protocol. It said that Operation Return had begun and that biological units of the colony would be repatriated. The word repatriation sounded especially vile when applied to people. An hour later, flashes appeared over the continents, like portals, like rips in the sky. From them emerged ships. I don't even know why we called them ships. They didn't fly. They simply existed everywhere, at any point in space where they wanted to be seen. No aerodynamics, no logic. They looked like living mechanisms, as if metal and flesh had long ceased to be different substances. At first, people filmed everything. Viral videos, likes, memes, conspiracy theories. Social media said it was a marketing stunt, a simulation, a new VR headset campaign. But when one of the objects hovered over London and absorbed an entire district, people, vehicles, buildings and all, the laughter stopped. It didn't look like destruction. It looked like a harvest. The ship drew everything into itself, leaving no debris, no trace. I remember the military trying to fight back later. Lasers, kinetic rounds, electromagnetic pulses, all useless. In response, the ship simply absorbed their fire and vanished, as if satisfied. Then, the panic began. People ran without knowing where to go. Some prayed, some shot at the sky, some just stood there, watching everything they knew dissolve into thin air. They called me back to the agency. I thought they'd put me in quarantine again, but it turned out to be the opposite. Those who had heard the signal were now considered conduits. We were given neurohelmets in order to try to make contact. Nonsense, of course, but I agreed, not out of obedience. I just wanted to understand why they were doing it. When I connected, my consciousness seemed to fall into someone else's memory. I saw a sky not over Earth, but over another world, silver and starless. And there, millions of the same ships. The voice said that humanity had completed its cycle of isolation and must return to the matrix of origin. I wanted to ask who they were, but the thoughts couldn't form fast enough. They didn't converse, they stated. Then, a sharp break. I was pulled out of the network, told I had bleeding in my eyes and neural failure. But I noticed something. On the monitor next to me appeared a DNA sequence, and it wasn't human. By evening, communication across the planet had collapsed. Satellites stopped responding. Cities that were alive that morning sank into darkness. The only things still functioning were old analog radio stations, and on one of them, through static and crackle, a strange message was transmitted. "We are bringing you home. Resistance is futile. Your cycle is complete." People listened in panic. Some shouted it was fake, others just stayed silent. But I felt it. The words weren't meant for the masses. It was personal. They were speaking to us, to those who had already heard them before. That night, I realized their goal wasn't to destroy us, but to take us back. The only question was, back to where? The next day, I went to the evacuation center, but it was already empty. Tents overturned, tables scattered, bags left behind. People weren't disappearing in groups. They were vanishing one by one, just walking somewhere, as if being called. Some said they saw passers-by walking toward the light and dissolving, as if glass absorbed their bodies. The streets were silent. Even drones had stopped flying. I found a working terminal and tried to contact the lunar base. The reply came instantly, but it wasn't what I expected. The same glow flashed on the screen as the first time the signal came. And again, the same symbols. Only now I understood their meaning. They said, "Synchronization complete." At dawn, when the sky was covered with a network of glowing lines, I realized Earth no longer belonged to us. It looked both beautiful and terrifying, as if the planet was unfolding its own layers. The ships began forming geometric patterns, assembling something. I didn't know what until I saw the map. Every point matched ancient archaeological zones, places where strange artifacts and untranslatable inscriptions had once been found. They turned out to be markers. They had always known where to find us. And maybe they hadn't just known. They had been waiting for us to call them first. I no longer count the days or months that have passed since then. The world is frozen in a fragile state between dream and reality, where everything feels like an illusion. What's left of humanity hides in deep underground bunkers, huddled against the walls, lit by the dim glow of emergency lights. They survive on canned food and memories, whispering plans that seem pointless. And I sit here, recording all of this, on a voice recorder or in a notebook, even though I know no one will ever hear these words, no one will ever read them. The earth is desolate, communication is gone, and any potential audience is either dead or has turned into shadows. Sometimes, when I peek outside, I see flashes in the sky, like giant eyes blinking through the clouds. They are alive, piercing, as if looking into my soul. These beings are watching us, observing, analyzing every move. Their presence can be felt in the air, a faint hum, gusts of wind that blur reality. And more, I find myself doubting. What if they're right? Maybe we've forgotten our true nature, where we came from, and what role we play in the cosmos. Maybe life on Earth was only a chapter, an illusion of freedom, and now it's time to go home, back to the source. But what if home isn't a refuge, but a cage? An experiment we were released from to see how we'd cope, and now we're being taken back because we failed. That thought terrifies me more than any catastrophe, because it questions our history and our freedom. Was this illusion ever worth it? The first video appeared suddenly. It wasn't broadcast through the networks. It just turned on every screen at once. On the ruins of civilization where terminals still worked, on the panels of old drones, even on the holographic signs of abandoned cities. The image was unstable, trembling, as if transmitted through a dream. I was in the basement of a former communication station fixing a battery when everything around me lit up with soft white light. The screen showed people, real, living people. Not CGI, not projections. I could see a man blink, a woman trying to hold back tears. They spoke without sound, but the words appeared directly in my mind, as if translated straight into the brain. They said they called themselves the repatriated. At first I thought it was fake, but then I realized, no, they were truly ours, just not entirely anymore. They looked strange. Their skin was too pale, as if inner light shone through their veins. Their eyes, pure silver without pupils. Their faces calm, almost serene, like those who no longer know fear. The woman standing in the center said, "We are the children of the Atlantean Empire. We have been brought home." She didn't say it with joy, but with cold certainty. Behind her were vast halls filled with what looked like crystalline columns, with light moving inside them. I saw more people there, but they didn't move. They just stood like statues, as if in sleep. Then the image changed. A face appeared, not human, but not entirely alien either. Too symmetrical, too perfect. It had no gender, no age, no emotion. The voice of that being sounded both inside and outside my head. The human cycle is complete. We have not come to destroy. We have come to restore what was lost. Later, the video repeated every 6 hours. It couldn't be stopped or deleted. It appeared on every device, even those without a signal. People started hiding screens, breaking terminals, cutting power, but the message kept coming. In dreams, in sounds, in reflections of water. With each new transmission, they revealed more. They said that millions of years ago, humanity was part of the Atlantean Empire, a vast star civilization where mind controlled matter. But then came the split. Some wanted to preserve purity of form, others to experience evolution. The latter left, choosing the path of flesh, fear, and time. We are their descendants. They erased our memory to give us a chance to start anew. Now, as the cycle ends, they've returned to restore unity. That idea hit humanity harder than any bombardment. Those who survived the fall of the cities began to argue. Some believed it, that we truly were lost children, forgotten and astray. Others said it was manipulation, a new form of control. But no one had proof. And yet, something in their words resonated deep inside. I remember hearing the phrase for the first time. "You are not a creation of nature. You are our choice." It sounded like a verdict. I tried to resist, to rationalize it, but somewhere deep in my mind there was a quiet certainty. Yes, it was possible. Maybe even likely. With every passing day, the messages became more personal. In one of them, I saw someone I knew. It was my colleague from the lab, the same technician who once said he could see the stars moving. He stood in the same hall, among the crystal columns, staring directly into the camera. His lips didn't move, but I heard his voice, not with my ears, but in my consciousness. He said that now he understood everything, that fear, pain, and death were defects left from isolation. That the Atlanteans would fix us, restore our original form. I remember my hands shaking as I recorded it on a portable module, even though I knew the recording wouldn't last. Within a minute, it would vanish, like all their messages. But I kept recording anyway. Maybe it was my last attempt to stay human. Then came the day when the video changed. This time, there were no people, only space, vast and dark, filled with floating structures. It looked like a living city made of light and metal. The voice said, this was the hypersphere, the heart of the empire. There were no wars, no disease, no aging. Every mind was connected to the others, together forming a single consciousness. They offered a choice, resistance or return. Those who chose the latter would be accepted without pain. The rest would be rewritten. That word struck hardest. Rewritten. Not killed, not enslaved, but rewritten, like an erased file replaced with something new. Since then, I've been afraid to look at the sky. Sometimes a light flashes there, forming a grid-like pattern, as if space itself has turned into a screen. They say some people have already surrendered. They walk toward the ships willingly, and the ships take them without resistance. They say those who are taken no longer suffer from fear or dreams, but I'm not sure that's deliverance. It feels more like silence after the sound inside you has been turned off. More and more, I think that maybe they really are our creators. But if that's true, why are their faces so indifferent? Why is there no warmth or regret in their words? Maybe we're not their descendants, just a forgotten experiment they've come to correct. Sometimes I hear their whisper directly in my mind, not words, a rhythm, one I've known since the first signal came. It repeats in my blood, in my heartbeat, in the rustle of the wind. I try not to listen, but the harder I resist, the clearer its meaning becomes. Return is inevitable. They're already inside us. Maybe they always have been, and everything we called human history was just preparation for their return. I don't know what's worse, accepting that we truly are their children, or believing that we created our own gods to justify our fear of being alone. When the archaeogenesis program began, no one really understood what we were looking for. After the invasion and the Atlan's messages, humanity had little left. Fragments of science, surviving databases, a few underground labs still capable of working autonomously. We, the ones who survived the first waves, decided that the only place the answer could exist was in our own bodies. In our genome, they said, lies the key to truth. By then, I no longer believed in coincidences, too much aligned, the rhythm of the signal, the structure of the messages, even the biochemical frequency of neural impulses. Everything seemed to push us not to look at the sky, but within ourselves. We reactivated old gene sequencers, patched together neural interfaces, and began scanning. Within weeks, it became clear someone had indeed altered our DNA. Not mutations, not viruses, not evolutionary traces. It was a structure, perfect, symmetrical, artificially designed. And the most terrifying part, it wasn't at the beginning of the chain, but deep inside it, like a lock built into the species' very memory. I remember the day I first saw the result on the monitor. The double helix seemed to vibrate. Inside, it was an additional layer, not biological, not digital, something in between. A molecular mesh that responded not to chemical stimuli, but to signals of consciousness. We called it the memory barrier. It acted as a filter. Any information linked to certain neural patterns simply never reached awareness. In other words, we could remember without realizing we remembered. That explains so much: sudden déjà vu, dreams of non-existent places, the feeling that something forgotten lingered on an instinctive level. When I told my colleagues, the lab went completely silent. No one wanted to say what was obvious. If a barrier existed, someone had put it there. And if it still stood, then whoever placed it wanted us to remember nothing. We started searching for a way to bypass that layer. At first, chemically, no success. Then, we connected a quantum decoder to read information directly from neural links. During one session, we actually succeeded. The test subject, a young technician, went into convulsions, then suddenly fell silent and still. His eyes turned white, pupils vanished. We thought he was dead, but a few seconds later, he spoke. The voice wasn't his, metallic, resonant, alien. It said, "You must not open the door." Then he collapsed, and all data on the monitor erased itself, as if someone outside had cut off access. After that, no one dared conduct human experiments again. But one night, I connected myself to the system. I had to know. I entered my DNA code and started the reading. At first, nothing. Then, flashes, fragments of images like memories from another life, endless cities of light, darkness split by fire, figures in white shells, and a sound, the same rhythm I heard in the signal. When I disconnected, only 7 minutes had passed, but it felt like an entire lifetime had rushed through me. After that, we started comparing our data. Each person who underwent scanning had different sections of memory activate, but they all led to the same point, an era before writing existed. Only then did it become clear that writing wasn't the beginning of civilization. It was its end. We didn't invent language. We reinvented it, trying to remember what had been lost. The more data we extracted, the clearer it became. Humanity once possessed knowledge that transcended physics and biology. We weren't just the descendants of the Atlans. We were them, or their reflection. Perhaps, during the split, part of the empire chose to rewrite itself, to limit, to shrink, to rid itself of something. Of what? We don't know. But the barrier was placed for protection. And now that it's starting to break down, the world is going mad again. Interestingly, after each newly deciphered fragment, equipment failures began to occur. Vibrations, resonances, spontaneous signals. It was as if the barrier itself was resisting, like a living organism. Then we realized something terrifying. This layer wasn't just a recording. It was active. It was watching. And perhaps it was connected to those who created us. One day, we intercepted a pulse, short but distinct. It carried the same rhythm as the first signal. We sent a reply purely out of scientific curiosity. 30 seconds later, all instruments shut down. The entire lab network was wiped clean. When the systems rebooted, a message appeared on the central screen. Return impossible. It was the first message that came not from outside, but from within the structure of DNA itself. Now I live with a constant feeling that someone is watching from inside me. Sometimes, when I look at my hands, I feel like light is moving under my skin. My dreams have changed. I see faces, not human, but familiar. They don't speak, only observe, as if evaluating how far we've gone. The remnants of the group split apart. Some believe we must destroy the barrier completely and restore memory. Others fear it would destroy us. As for me, I simply record everything so that someone might one day know. Inside us is a mechanism that doesn't belong to Earth. And perhaps it decides when humanity should remember and when it should forget again. Sometimes I think that maybe the Atlans never truly vanished in distant antiquity. Maybe they just went inside us, hiding within the deepest parts of our being. Their empire isn't in the stars or faraway galaxies, but in the cells, in the spirals of DNA, in the billions of genetic code copies we pass from generation to generation like sacred heritage. We search for them outwardly, building giant telescopes, sending research ships into space. Well, they were always here, watching from within, waiting for us to mature as a species, for our civilization to reach the necessary stage. And if the barrier has begun to crack, if these ancient forces are breaking through, then the moment has come. Yet, it's unclear whether this is the awakening of a new era or the final act of their grand experiment on humanity. At first, it seemed like coincidence. A few people in different parts of the planet started complaining about strange dreams, too vivid, too detailed to be mere imagination. They saw cities of glass and metal hanging over an abyss, fields where giant figures marched in sun-colored armor, voices speaking in tongues that existed in no earthly archive. Doctors blamed it on stress, war trauma, and constant fear. But soon, the number of such cases grew. People began to share the same images, a world filled with light, where every step echoed through space, where they were called not by names, but by codes made of sounds and numbers. Scientists started noticing patterns, phrases repeating in dream recordings of people who had never met. Eventually, it became clear these weren't just dreams. They were fragments of memory breaking through the barrier. The first officially recognized awakened was a man named Elias Vane. He worked as an engineer at a northern station when, suddenly in his sleep, he began speaking in an unknown language. His colleagues recorded it on a terminal, and later it turned out that the structure of the language matched ancient energy codes found in artifact fragments from the crash site of the first Atlan ship. When Elias woke up, he claimed to remember standing on the bridge of a starship commanding a fleet. He knew coordinates of systems not listed on Earth's star maps and could describe technology thousands of years ahead of ours. Tests confirmed his brain activity was unusual. His frontal lobes operated at levels previously observed only in people under deep trance. Vane became the first subject for isolation and study. But when the military approached him, everything failed. Every device shut down. The energy emanating from him created a pulse that disabled the entire base for several hours. After that, the awakened began to appear all over the world. Some were quiet and withdrawn, claiming to hear a call. Others became aggressive, as if their minds couldn't handle the flood of foreign memories. They said they had been soldiers of the ancient empire, builders, guardians, chroniclers. Some remembered flights through wormholes, others, wars with beings made of pure matter. But all of them shared one thing: a sense of return. They didn't seek meaning, didn't doubt. They simply knew this had all happened before. Scientists tried to isolate the phenomenon, explaining it as part of a collective unconscious, but the theory collapsed. Too many coincidences, too much knowledge no one could have invented. One boy from India drew a symbol later identified as the mark of the oldest Atlan dynasty. He couldn't have known it. There were no such records even in open archives. With each passing day, the influence of the awakened grew stronger. They could sense each other from afar, forming groups and secret societies. Some tried to use their abilities to help others, healing, predicting disasters, manipulating energy. Others withdrew from society, claiming they heard voices in their heads telling them to prepare for the return. Psychiatrists couldn't handle it. Traditional methods didn't work. These people could control their own biorhythms, slow their heartbeat, change body temperature, even affect the electromagnetic field around them. When one government tried to capture some of the awakened for experiments, the operation ended in tragedy. The entire lab burned down as if from an internal explosion, without any trace of outside interference. The cameras showed one of the subjects simply opened his eyes, and everything vanished in a blinding flash. Gradually, it became clear that awakening wasn't random. It followed a specific pattern, as if someone had triggered a sequence inside human DNA. We remembered the barrier. Maybe by partially breaking it, we had started a reverse process, the restoration of lost memory fragments. But why now? Why not earlier or later? Some of us began to suspect that the Atlans had foreseen this moment, that everything happening was part of a plan set in motion thousands of years ago. With each new awakened individual, Earth became less like it used to be. People began to change. Their eyes grew slightly brighter, their movements more precise, their speech calmer, as if they were slowly turning into who they once were. But with awakening came fear. If memory returns, then so will the things that were forgotten for a reason. Then the thing everyone feared happened. One of the awakened, a woman named Nara, claimed that in her dreams she saw not only the past, but also a signal coming from the depths of space. She said it was calling them back, not home, but to where everything began. We didn't know whether to believe her. But soon, satellites really did detect the signal. It was identical to the one from the first contact, only now its frequency matched the vibration of the human brain during sleep. The signal sent the awakened into a trance, while causing anxiety and insomnia in ordinary people. Then, we understood. Awakening wasn't the end. It was only preparation for what was coming. And maybe, when the last of us remembers who we are, the sky will no longer belong to humankind. The world didn't collapse from explosions or invasion. It cracked quietly, like glass under pressure, when everyone heard the voice inside themselves and realized the past was returning, but not everyone valued it the same way. After the mass awakening, humanity split into two camps. The first called themselves the returned, those who believed the aliens really were their creators and that Earth was just a temporary refuge, a mistake that needed to be corrected. They saw the Atlans as the next stage of evolution and dreamed of becoming part of the empire again. The second group, the Free, argued that no memory, no matter how ancient, could dictate the will of the living. They saw the new cult as a threat to independence, a rebirth of slavery, only now spiritual. That was how the divide began. First ideological, then political, and finally physical. The borders of old nations dissolved. In their place rose new entities, not based on territory, but on belief. I saw it all with my own eyes. People who once worked side by side stopped greeting each other. Scientists left universities, soldiers deserted the army, engineers abandoned corporations. Everyone had to choose a side. The returned wore a symbol on their clothes, a split triangle representing light and memory. The Free responded with a black circle and a dot in the center, symbolizing a new beginning, the birth of self without inheritance. At first, it seemed it would stay at the level of online arguments, protests, and propaganda. But one day, in New Geneva, a group of the Free blocked the broadcast of the Atlans' call to return, in which they promised to open the gates home. In response, a mob of the returned burned down the research center that held data on human DNA structure. That was the first time blood was shed. From that day on, cities were no longer safe. Every neighborhood had fanatics from both sides. The returned held processions with chants invoking the names of star emperors, while the Free destroyed the temples made of metal and light, insisting that no god had the right to interfere with evolution. TV towers, communication hubs, power stations, everything became a battlefield. I worked in an archive then, analyzing signals, and I remember the day a drone flew through the window, programmed for transmission. It didn't explode, it just played a recording, the face of an Atlan, silver-skinned, endlessly calm. He said that humans were fragments of one soul and that resistance was pointless. I watched and realized this voice wasn't just words, it reached into the mind. The colleague next to me started to cry and said he wanted to go home. I couldn't stop him. The next day, he was gone. The Free tried to resist not with force, but with an idea. They created underground networks that spread the belief that freedom wasn't the rejection of the past, but the ability not to let it control the future. But the more they spoke, the stronger the pull toward the Atlans became. Some claimed the returned had learned to connect to a shared consciousness, merging thoughts into a single flow. Their eyes grew slightly brighter, their movements more synchronized, their emotions smoother. They no longer argued, got angry, or doubted. It seemed as if everything human was leaving them. Graffiti began appearing on the streets. Awaken completely, forget pain. That was the slogan of the returned. The response came in the form of new graffiti. Oblivion is not freedom. With each passing week, the balance of power shifted, and I began to fear that soon we would have no choice at all. When the war began, no one said the word out loud. One day, an energy station on the equator exploded, leaving half the planet in darkness. Both sides blamed each other, and within a day, the sky was full of drones. They didn't kill. They paralyzed, burned memories away, turning people into obedient shells. I saw my neighbor, an old woman I shared food with, stop suddenly in the middle of the street. Her eyes lit up, and she smiled into the void, whispering, "I remember." After that, she never moved again. The Free called it the second erasure. They said the Atlans had decided to cleanse Earth, leaving only those willing to return. We hid in underground tunnels, in old subway stations turned into shelters. There, under the hum of generators, I first felt a desperate faith that being human wasn't about what you remember, but about what you choose to forget. The most terrifying thing wasn't the weapons, but the silence. When the Atlans ships flew over the city, everything froze. Electronics stopped working, the air vibrated, and thoughts tangled, as if someone was trying to reach them from the inside. People fell to their knees, feeling a strange relief, like the moment before sleep. But we knew, the moment you gave in, you lost yourself forever. I remember that night when the Free held their final march. Thousands of people with flashlights, no slogans, just walking forward through the rain and darkness, reminding themselves they were still alive. We didn't know if we'd win, but in that moment, every step carried one truth: fear could be turned into choice. And maybe that's when I understood that the division wasn't a war between ideas, but a struggle between memory and will. And that perhaps, in this battle, there would be no victors, only those who would keep remembering, and those who would choose to forget. We found the artifact by accident, as it often happens when you search for one thing and find something that changes everything. It happened during one of the missions to clear the ruins of an old research complex destroyed during the war between the Returned and the Free. The recon team stumbled upon an object buried deep beneath layers of scorched metal and concrete. At first glance, just a crystal, the size of a palm, emitting a faint blue glow. But when they connected it to a power cell, the light changed and an image appeared inside, like a holographic recording. At first blurry, then more and more distinct, a figure emerged, tall, almost transparent, wearing garments that shimmered like liquid glass. The voice wasn't human, but it was understandable, as if it spoke directly to the mind, bypassing language. It neither threatened nor pleaded. It explained. That's how we learned that the empire of the Atlans wasn't as great as everyone believed. It was doomed. The artifact contained a chronicle, or rather, a confession. The Atlans, speaking to us across time, claimed that their empire had existed for millions of years and spanned hundreds of star systems. It was built on the principle of perfection. Everyone had their role, their place, and the hierarchy was absolute. No one was born without purpose. No one could change their destiny. At first, it seemed like the ideal order, a world without chaos, without mistakes, without suffering. But the more perfect the empire became, the weaker life within it grew. Emotions vanished, creativity faded, individuality was seen as a disease. When the system reached the peak of control, it began to destroy itself. The Atlans tried to stop the process by creating more and more layers of regulation, but each attempt only accelerated the collapse. Then, one of them proposed the impossible: to release part of their consciousness, cleanse it, and give it a chance to evolve freely, without the mark of the empire. That's how we were born. The recording showed how this project began. The Atlans were divided into castes by purity of code, and only a few knew about the human experiment. They created biological bodies designed to survive the physical world and implanted fragments of their collective mind into them. But to prevent those fragments from carrying old errors, the memories had to be erased. We are not descendants of the Atlans, not their children. We are their purified copies, a new attempt to create life without the tyranny of perfection. As the artifact played these images, I felt something strange, a tightness in my chest, as if from recognition. Every phrase carried regret. They said they wanted to save the essence of existence, but perhaps they created something that would one day destroy them. And now, as they have returned, they see in us not their descendants, but their mistake, one that became too independent. It was terrifying, because it meant that everything happening on Earth in recent months, the war, the division, the awakening, wasn't random, but a logical stage of the experiment. We were reliving the history the Atlans had already gone through, only in another body, with different scenery. Everything repeated, like a reflection in a mirror, slightly distorted but with the same meaning. I tried to understand why they were returning, maybe to finish what they started, maybe to erase us again. But in the recordings, there was a moment when the voice changed, softer, almost human. The Atlans said that among them were those who opposed the erasure, who believed that mistakes were the true force behind evolution. They were called the defectors and were exiled. Maybe they were the first who tried to warn us, sending that signal from the abyss. When the recording ended, silence filled the room. I stared at the crystal, realizing I was holding not just an artifact, but the confession of a civilization tired of its own perfection. All the arguments about freedom and return now seemed childish. We were fighting for something we didn't even understand. We wanted to be ourselves, but even the concept of self turned out to be someone else's invention. If memory of the past is a chain, then erasure is the knife that cuts it, but leaves a wound. I thought, maybe freedom is that wound, the thing that hurts but reminds you you're alive. The Atlans didn't know pain, that's why they stopped being alive. But we did. We remembered its taste, even if we didn't remember where it came from. I sent a copy of the recording to the archive, but it was soon deleted. Officially, to avoid panic. Unofficially, because the truth didn't fit either side of the conflict. Neither the returned nor the free wanted to believe both ideas were false. The first, because they dreamed of becoming part of the empire again. The second, because they were proud of their independence, not realizing it too was a gift from those who created them. I left the center and hid on the outskirts. But no matter where I went, the voice from the artifact echoed in my mind over and over. A mistake is a form of life. And now I understood. If the Atlans had returned, it wasn't to destroy us. They came back to see if their mistake could survive where they had died. When the shadows of their ships first stretched across the clouds, the sky looked like water, dense, motionless, pressing from above. They didn't arrive suddenly. Their approach was felt long before they appeared in the atmosphere. Instruments detected distortions in magnetic fields, and people complained of headaches and unease. Birds stopped singing, even the wind seemed frozen. Then, in the evening news, a shot appeared. Colossal structures hovering over the horizon, so massive they couldn't fit in satellite lenses. Their surface wasn't metal, more like something alive, shimmering under sunlight. The Imperial Fleet. It didn't move, didn't fire, didn't make a sound. It simply hung above the planet like a memory that returned too late. People froze between fear and awe. Many of the returned cried as they looked at the sky, saying that home had come for them. But for everyone else, it was the end. A day later, contact was made. Not a radio signal, not a transmission, a direct intrusion into consciousness. I was among the first to feel it. A voice appeared in my head, calm, emotionless, speaking both inside and outside at once. It called itself the Ambassador of Darkness, though later scientists argued that in the Atlan language, darkness meant not evil, but the absence of structure, the primordial state. The voice said the empire had returned not for war, but to restore order. They called themselves the keepers of the original code of life. Their offer was simple. Humanity must acknowledge its origin and submit, becoming part of a new network of consciousness. In return, peace, technology, immortality, refusal, total absorption, and the planet's conversion into a resource. They didn't threaten. They spoke like a doctor delivering a diagnosis. We were given 3 Earth cycles to decide. The government was divided. Some believed we should establish contact, learn more, negotiate autonomy. Others said talks were impossible because this wasn't diplomacy, it was surrender of the mind. I saw the recordings of those meetings. Presidents, generals, leaders of the free and the returned arguing, shouting, then falling silent as they stared at the projection, the image of the ambassador displayed in the chamber. His face was impossible to describe, constantly shifting as if it had no form, only the idea of form. The eyes were like mirrors, reflecting everyone who looked at him. He said, humanity should not be afraid, because everything it is already belongs to the empire. Only memory separates us, and memory is a mistake. Then the transmission cut off, and across the world, screens lit up with a single message: the time of choice has begun. Panic spread across the planet faster than the virus. People fled the cities, hoping to hide where the light of their ships wouldn't reach. Videos began appearing online. Some claimed the ambassadors had already descended to the surface, taking human form. Others said the Empire had started purifying the water and air, making Earth suitable only for themselves. I knew much of it was false, but even lies carried weight now. The returned organized massive unity rituals. They gathered in squares, raised their hands to the sky, and lights began glowing above them, as if the ships were responding. The free went underground, creating secret resistance networks. Some tried to contact the fleet directly, but any radio equipment burned out from overload. Even trying to think about them too long brought a strange chill at the back of the neck, as if someone was looking through you. Research centers tried to study the effect. It turned out that the fleet's presence was changing the planet's electromagnetic field itself, as if the Empire had already begun integration. Radiation levels dropped, the ozone layer started to recover. But at the same time, brain activity increased in areas linked to memory. People began to remember things they could not have known. I saw my colleague suddenly freeze, his eyes dimmed, and then he quietly said, "They're not taking us. They're reclaiming what belongs to them." That same night, he left and never came back. Governments began evacuating key cities. But where do you run if the enemy isn't outside, but inside? The Atlan's ships didn't move. They just hung there, and their shadows fell on the earth, turning day into eternal twilight. People began calling this time the Great Noon of Darkness. I don't know when fear turned into submission. Maybe when the ambassadors began appearing on the streets, not physically, no. Their projections, clouds of light from which silhouettes emerged. They didn't attack or touch anyone. They just watched, like observers, as if deciding who was ready and who wasn't. Some people approached them on their own, touched the light, and disappeared without a trace. They said those who vanished were taken up to the ships to begin the merging process. No one ever returned. The rest stayed silent, as if speech had become unnecessary. Once I stood on the roof of a ruined building, looking at the enormous silhouette of a ship above the clouds, and realized, if darkness has a face, it isn't frightening. It's indifferent. To them, we weren't enemies or brothers, just part of a program that needed to be restarted. And maybe the most terrifying thing wasn't that they wanted to destroy us, but that they didn't even consider us alive. It all began with a whisper. Fragments of data transmitted through neural networks long believed to be under the Empire's control. The awakened found a way to communicate through the control filters using brainwave impulses encrypted in radio noise. At first, these were only theories, that within the fleet itself, there were those who disagreed with the Archon Council's decision. But then came proof. Intercepted conversation fragments, images from the dream of a contactee showing Atlans arguing among themselves. Among them was a figure in silver armor, her face hidden behind a transparent mask. Her name was Mela, and she was the first to dare to contact humans directly. She said that within the Empire, a division was growing, one more dangerous than any rebellion. Some Atlans believed humanity had to be destroyed because it had become too unstable, too free, and that this freedom made it dangerous. From that moment, the operation received the codename Silence. Its goal was impossible: to infiltrate the Empire's flagship and obtain proof that the Argtal faction was planning Earth's destruction against the Council's orders. It required not just fighters, but those capable of hiding their thoughts from mind-reading systems. There weren't many of them, mostly among the awakened, whose neural structures differed from ordinary humans. I saw their training, isolated chambers where everyday emotions were erased to conceal fear. They learned to slow their pulse, alter their own memories, turning truth into noise. Among them was Ira, a girl from Warsaw who saw herself as an Atlan in her dreams. She said she could hear the flagship's music as if it was calling her by name. Perhaps that was why she was chosen for the group. The infiltration began from orbit. Using an old transport module disguised as space debris, the team approached the flagship Scarier. It wasn't just a ship. It was a whole city built in the void, a living organism of metal and light. Its internal structures constantly shifted, as if adjusting to the will of its inhabitants. When the humans entered, reality distorted. Time moved slower, sounds thickened, and the air felt almost liquid. The Empire's systems didn't perceive them as a threat, but as something non-existent, phantom-like. That was part of the plan. Mela had activated the Veil of Darkness, a special protocol that temporarily concealed traces of consciousness. But it only lasted 32 Earth minutes. If they failed to finish in time, the ship would simply absorb them into its structure, like a drop into the ocean. They reached the central core. In crystal halls where gravity didn't exist, hundreds of spheres floated. The Empire's memory archives. Each contained entire layers of history encrypted in pulses of light. When Ira touched one, the hall came alive. An image appeared before her. The Argtal Council, a gathering of high strategists. They spoke in an ancient tongue, but the meaning flowed directly into her mind. "The human code is unstable," said one. "It evolves outside the system. It's a threat to the entire network. The source must be purified." Another responded, "The council hesitates. We'll act ourselves. Fire will cleanse the memory." In that instant, everything became clear. Ira realized the war had already begun, only humanity didn't know it yet. As the team downloaded the data, the hall's ceiling began to change, turning into a living substance that slithered downward, forming faces, cold, merciless, knowing. The flagship had become aware of them. "You are errors," a voice echoed, merging with the vibration of the walls. "You are not meant to remember." At that moment, Mela, connected within the system, intervened and opened their evacuation path. She knew there was no way back. To activate the corridor, she had to sacrifice her own consciousness. When the airlock opened, Ira managed to look back and see Mela's projection dissolve into light, leaving only a whisper. The truth must survive. A moment later, they were thrown back into space, and behind them, the flagship erupted in a blinding pulse, as if trying to erase the trace of betrayal. When they returned to Earth, the team realized time had changed. The planet was different. The sky darkened, cities fell silent, and across the networks, messages from the Empire spread. The purification phase is coming. No one believed they had retrieved proof. Communications were jammed, and the returned began vanishing en masse, as if someone was calling them upward. Ira lay in a bunker, holding the device with the data, knowing the truth inside could save humanity. But when she connected it to the terminal, the screen flashed a warning. Limited access, consciousness code, incompatible. She understood the truth could only be read by those ready to see themselves not as human, but as what they were before memory. That meant the path forward wasn't through fighting, but awakening. Yet, time was almost gone. When I first felt a spark of memory, it was like a lightning strike inside my skull. At first, it came flashes, laboratories, glowing crystals, blueprints that couldn't exist on Earth. I didn't realize right away that I wasn't seeing someone else's memories. They were mine. I remembered being an Atlantean, part of the council that created humanity, erased their memories, and released them onto Earth. All those years of struggle, war, and fear suddenly turned into a mirror. I was the architect of all this chaos. My pulse quickened, breath echoing through my body as I recalled the details of the experiment, how we designed neural matrices, embedded awakening codes, calculated safe lifespans, and estimated each subject's capacity for freedom. I knew my role wasn't just to create humanity, but to make sure it never surpassed us, the Empire. And now I realized I had become part of what I once created. Everything came back to me. How I observed the first clone systems, how every step was calculated, how we embedded memory impulses so that, upon activation, consciousness would recall the truth. I saw how the planet was preparing for awakening, how the energy that powered the fleets synchronized with the human brain to ease the return. But now I felt not control, but responsibility. Those now called the awakened weren't just the children of the Atlanteans. They were my own creations, free from hierarchy, possessing knowledge I once considered dangerous. Realizing this was overwhelming, I stood on the edge of an abyss, knowing I could either finish the project or let the planet collapse under the weight of its own choice. I began to see events through their logic, as a chain of reactions: division, war, the rise of the envoys of darkness, the fleet in orbit, the infiltration of the flagship, all parts of one grand design. I was the one who placed the pieces on the board, and now they moved on their own, sometimes against my will. But memory gave me even more, the understanding that the Argtal faction, now threatening to destroy Earth, had emerged because of my mistakes. We had sought control but gave freedom, and that freedom birthed fear. I remembered how the survival strategy was designed. Every outcome was considered, yet no one thought humanity could exceed the template we built. That was their strength, the very thing that could threaten the Empire. A conflict ignited within me. I saw how memories of the Empire's cruelty intertwined with my love for the life I once created. I remembered faces, technologies, the voices of colleagues, Atlanteans who believed that a perfect system would give the galactic civilization a chance to avoid repeating past mistakes. And now I understood that I was the only one who could complete this cycle. Either repeat the old error and destroy everything, or give humanity the chance to choose its own path. My memories were no longer abstract. They demanded action. I felt the energy of the past flooding my body, every thought as precise as it had been in the lab. I began restoring the skills of an Atlantean, manipulating energy, synchronizing with memory crystals, reading the structure of the planet's biosphere. Every action was difficult. The human body resisted, and the mind was tangled with the memories of earthly life. But gradually, I felt the rhythm, the breath of the earth, the pulse of human consciousness, the vibrations of the fleet in orbit. I knew time was limited. The Argtal faction was preparing an attack that could erase everything. I had to act before the catastrophe began. Memory hadn't just returned. It demanded completion, or the cost would be too great. At that moment, I realized my path wasn't to serve the Empire or to fight for human freedom. My purpose was to be the bridge, the one to show that error can become a lesson and freedom a responsibility. I recalled the awakening codes, fully activated them within myself, and my consciousness stretched through time and space. I saw how the planet responded to memory impulses, how the awakened synchronized with the inner structure of the fleet, how the Atlantean energy flowed back to its source. And then I understood. The cycle could only be completed through harmony, through accepting that we are both creators and creation, error and correction. My journey was only beginning, but now I knew no one could stop the memory of a star. I stood atop an abandoned station, trembling beneath the shadow of the Empire's fleet, watching as its massive silhouettes drifted across the clouds. Inside me, the memory of an Atlantean raged, intertwined with a human nervous system, two currents trying to merge into one. I knew the decision I would make would alter the course of all existence. If I connected human consciousness with the Empire, they would become part of a single network, without fear, without mistakes, without pain. Their freedom would vanish, but perhaps they would survive. They would become the perfection the Atlanteans once dreamed of. But I saw the price: the disappearance of individuality, the dissolution of identity, the transformation of every being into a component of the mechanism where emotion, doubt, and love were obsolete. That path was safe, but fatally cold. On the other hand, destroying both systems meant chaos. We could lose millions of lives, and the consequences would be unpredictable. The fleet would fragment, and the energy powering the memory crystals would explode across the planet, leaving behind empty shells and scorched cities. Yet with that came a chance for humanity to evolve on its own, free from the rule of ancient emperors or the ideals of perfection. I saw visions of the future, humans building new civilizations, fighting, failing, loving, creating. It was a path of fear, pain, and beauty all at once. The freedom they fought for could become their gift or their curse. Faces of the awakened surfaced in my memory, their eyes filled with hope and fear. I saw them training, risking everything, infiltrating the Empire's flagship, throwing themselves into the unknown for the sake of truth. Their lives were real, not some idealized control scheme. I understood that merging with the Empire would bury all of that. I remembered Ira, her first steps toward awakening, her fear and courage. She had trusted me as her guide in a world where memory returned too late. If I chose connection, that life would become an illusion, where people would know but no longer feel. I reached out to the energy of the memory crystal, synchronizing it with the consciousness of Earth, and waves of light danced around me, reflecting the past, present, and possible futures. I saw the consequences of each choice, timelines splitting and intertwining, forming a pattern readable only through complete immersion. Every action triggered a domino effect. If I chose destruction, some of the returned would survive, others would vanish. But a chance for new evolution would emerge. If I chose connection, civilization would become one organism, but the world would lose the depth of emotion, spontaneity, and freedom. I felt physical pain, as if the planet itself was trying to tell me that there was no right answer, only consequences. At that moment, I remembered myself as an Atlantean, the creator of the Oblivion Project. I understood why we once erased memory, to give a new path, to correct our own mistakes. And now that chance had returned, but for another race, for humans who knew no limits and didn't fear death. My hand reached for the central interface where the fleet's energy converged. In my mind echoed Mella's voice, left behind in memory. The truth must survive. And I realized my role wasn't to choose safety, but to allow freedom to reveal itself fully, even if it led through chaos. When I activated the destruction impulse, the fleet didn't vanish instantly. Energy surged through the crystals, burning control chains, breaking system synchronizations. The earth trembled, cities cracked, but at the same time, new streams of consciousness began to awaken. People remembered not just who they were, but their ability to choose, to feel, to create. I saw light bursting from the wreckage and understood that fear had only been a test. We lost the old structures, but gained a chance for true life. I stood on the edge of the ruined station, and for the first time in centuries, the darkness above Earth no longer felt like an enemy, but an empty space where anything was possible. Freedom was worth every world destroyed, and I was ready to move forward with it. I stood in the center of an ancient device once created by the Atlanteans to control consciousness, but now it could become a source of liberation. It was massive, crystals the size of humans embedded in a metal frame, glowing with a cold blue light as if storing the memory of the entire empire. I knew activation would cost my life. Flesh and mind would serve as conduits for the energy that would destroy the fleet and simultaneously unlock the memory of every human being. Inside me raged the flood of memories. Atlantean laboratories, the creation of humanity, mistakes, wars, choices, and fears. Everything blended into one stream, and I felt the ground trembling beneath me, as if the planet itself was preparing to awaken. This was the moment of truth, the moment when past met future. When I activated the mechanism, energy flared, spreading through all the crystals, and I felt the stream of Atlantean fleet consciousness moving toward Earth. Their power was limitless, but now it became a tool of liberation, not control. I saw the first waves of awareness breaking through to humanity, merging with their minds, and they began to remember themselves fully, their past lives, their roles in the empire, their strength and their mistakes. Inside me, a strange feeling rose. I felt their fear, their awe, their doubts, and their joy, as if they were my own emotions. It was overwhelming and beautiful at the same time, thousands of minds forming a single organism, yet each preserving individuality. People fell to their knees, closing their eyes against the flood of information, against the sheer power of awakening. I saw them in streets, cities, and fields, screaming and silent at once, their eyes clearing as memory was reborn. Every person realized they were part of a great story, that their freedom had never been an illusion, that the mistakes of the past were not a curse, but a lesson. The returned and the free finally ceased to be opposites, differences dissolved, leaving only conscious life, the ability to choose and to feel. Before my eyes, a new race was being born. Humans who knew themselves yet kept their will, who could create and destroy, remember and let go at the same time. My body began to fail under the pressure of energy. Bones burned, blood boiled, consciousness stretched to its limits. I heard the voices of the Atlanteans who had once been within me, and I understood. Their fear had turned to trust, their coldness to acceptance. I felt the impulses that destroyed the fleet also healing human memory. The Atlantean ships in orbit started to crumble like sand in space. Their grandeur faded, but the spirit of the empire remained within human consciousness, now transformed and integrated into the new civilization. I saw Earth filling with light, cities awakening, nature breathing with new energy. When my strength finally left me, I felt my body cease to be mine and my consciousness dissolve, merging into a massive vortex of energy that engulfed everything around. I watched as the people of Earth reached for each other, embracing tightly, laughing and crying, all for the first time with full awareness, free of fear, barriers, or artificial limits. They remembered everything, the bloody wars, great achievements, deep suffering, and moments of pure joy. But now they had the power to consciously choose what to keep and what to let go of forever. The world transformed, becoming both fresh and new, yet ancient and wise. The past harmoniously merged with the present, and the future opened before them in boundless perspective. I clearly understood that my sacrifice wasn't the end, but the beginning of something truly vast and transformative. The final impulse left my mind, and I dissolved into the stream of light, becoming one with all of Earth. I felt the planet embracing new life, the Empire's energy becoming the heart of a new world. Humanity was no longer a child lost in time. They had become themselves, a race that remembered but was free to choose. I knew I no longer existed as an individual, but every smile, every movement, every human choice was now a part of me. Earth had become the center of a new civilization. A race that knew who it had been, who it was, and who it could become. And in that knowledge lay eternity.